For in this modern world, the instruments of warfare are not solely for waging war. Far more importantly, they are the means for controlling peace. Those were the words of the famous Admiral Arleigh Burke, words which ring true in the universe of Squadron 42, where the Navy of the United Empire of Earth uses its vast fleets of ships to keep the peace of the verse as much as to wage war. From behemoth super dreadnoughts to the smallest utility ships, these ships of the UEE Navy stand as humanity's stubborn defiance to continue in a hostile galaxy. My name is Paul Shelley, and welcome to TheAstroHistorian. This is a channel dedicated to exploring and explaining the lore of sci-fi and space universes and discussing their impact. Today we'll be looking at the universe of Squadron 42 and the ships that make up the UEE Navy. This is a compilation of a series I did on the various ships of the UEE Navy, done for those who enjoy longer content all in one place. As a result, there may be some slight audio quality changes as the video goes on, but I've endeavored to try and seamlessly merge the various videos into a single long narrative to tell you about every ship in the UEE Navy. As always, note this is a general overview, and it is a game in development, so the stats listed here will likely change between the making of this video and the release, which means I will probably go over this again in the future as more information is revealed. I've also covered many of these ships before in standalone episodes, which I'll link when talking about the said ship for those interested. Let's start with the smallest of the capital ships of the UEE, the torpedo corvette known as the RSI Polaris. The Polaris is one of the latest capital ships of the UEE Navy, having been greenlit in the aftermath of the attack on Vega II and the start of the Vandal War in 2945. As a result, it doesn't have much history. What we do know is that for its relatively small 155-meter length, it packs quite the punch, at the fraction of the cost of its larger cousins. It's armed with 6 size 4 turrets, 5 manned and 1 remote, a size 5 turret, 32 size 3 missiles, and up to 38 size 10 capital killer torpedoes. All of this firepower is wrapped up in a sleek and fast frame, with 2 main and 4 auxiliary thrusters powered by a capital class power plant, which runs the length of the ship. On top of that, it can even support a single fighter for everything from force multiplication to survey capabilities. The ship's main purpose was to have an impressive firepower with a very small crew complement requirements, 6 to 14 at the time of this writing, thus reducing the cost of patrolling systems internally to aid local security, militia, or the advocacy in keeping the peace, while also allowing for a swift torpedo boat to be able to hold its own against Vandal fighters and subcaps while taking on larger targets. It is more than likely that the Polaris will act as a forward screen, augmented by patrol and gunships like the Hammerhead and the Perseus to help clear out smaller cap and subcap ships while serving in fleets. However, it's clear this ship's main job is, and will likely remain, homeland defense. The next ship is the Aegis Idris frigate. At 242 meters long, it sits almost 100 meters longer than the Polaris, and is the oldest designed capital ship still serving in the UEE Navy. The first generation of Idris was built in 2551, less than a decade after the end of the first interstellar conflict known as the First Tavaran War. Initially a corvette, it grew to the size of a frigate as its role was fleshed out in the post-war period, more specifically to help keep the peace in the now sprawling empire humanity found itself controlling. That meant its crew size had to grow with it, where today it sits anywhere from 8 to 28 crew members to fully crew, with active duty UEE Idris class ships having been known to have crews over 80 usually. The standard Idris today is bristling with firepower, with a missile launcher capable of hurling 10 size 5 missiles, 7 manned turrets with 12 size 5 and 2 size 7 mounts, and a devastating bespoke Hurston Dynamics size 10 destroyer mass driver cannon. This makes the Idris a fearsome opponent, as it can take on enemies of just about any size and stand a chance in a brawl. Adding to its range and impressive capabilities, is its through-and-through hangar, able to hold up to 3 fighters and an additional snub hangar for the Argo MPUV platform of ships. You'll find most Idris-class vessels operating on their own, patrolling the interior of the UEE or supporting the standard battle groups which dot the UEE space. One of the more notable Idris-class ships is the UEES Stanton, which is the main setting for Squadron 42. Unfortunately, the ship has also begun to show its age, and rumors of the Idris beginning to be retired are abound, likely to be replaced with the Polaris corvette. The next ship in the fleet is the Aegis Dynamics Javelin destroyer. Sitting at 480 meters long, the Javelin is twice the size of the Idris, and as a result, sits comfortably in the middle of the size of capital ship range of the UEE. Designed in 2690, it is the second oldest capital ship design in the fleet, but, unlike the Idris, is still very much active and used due to the nature of its modular design. You see, when the ship was first being built, it was envisioned as a means to cover multiple missing roles in the fleet, including convoy raider, convoy defense, search and rescue, fleet ops, orbital bombardment, and more. Thus, it was designed to be flexible, with its mix-and-match modular design to allow for individual destroyers the ability to swap roles literally on the fly. Because of all of this, it was also designed to be faster than the typical capitals of its time, while also sporting impressive firepower. Speaking of its impressive firepower, it comes standard with 32 size 12 torpedoes, 13 manned turrets with a combination of twin size 7 cannons for larger targets and size 4 Gatlings for smaller targets, and its main armament are 2 quad size 9 turrets which are remotely controlled. It even has a fighter bay capable of launching and recovering larger ships like the Aegis Vanguard Heavy Fighter. All in all, the larger size and more impressive armament of the Javelin make it the more desired combat ship of the UEE Navy over the Idris, meaning it often accompanies one or more Idris frigates into hostile zones when the UEE Navy feels it needs to have a suitable show of force, but for the fraction of the cost of sending an entire battle group. However, it has some drawbacks compared to the smaller ships of the fleet. Because of its size and weapons placement, the Javelin is not intended nor fitted to be able to land and take off from most atmospheres, unlike both the Polaris and the Idris, meaning it has to be refitted and repaired exclusively at specialized stations in vacuum. Its crew complement is also problematic, with the crew size of 12 to 80, likely not counting multiple shifts, which would put the crew size around 160 typically, much higher than both smaller capital ships. Because of all these factors, Javelins are found in a variety of roles like system defense, patrol, rapid response, and serving as transport and carrier escorts, though often in smaller numbers than the Idris-class ships. One of the more famous Javelins in game is the UES Warhammer, currently stationed at Imperial Naval Station Jericho in the Stanton system. The Warhammer famously took part in the Fall of Caliban, where it fired its weapons for so long to keep the Vandal at bay while ensuring the evacuation of civilians that gunners reported their sweat was instantly evaporating. The heat buildup of the fight was actually so intense that it warped the superstructure of the ship, resulting in future upgrades to improve the heat management of the Javelin-class ships. Another important Javelin is the UES Gauntlet, a ship your character serves on in the story of Squadron 42, and is present at the Battle of Vega II. The next class of ship is actually a bit of a mystery. We have seen 2 versions of this ship in footage for Squadron 42, one looking like a cruiser or battle cruiser, and the other one that looks like an escort carrier. Both seem to be derived from the Bengal-class carrier, which we will discuss later, but are smaller in size. We know of the UES Integrity in recent lore, which is classified as a cruiser and was active at the Battle of Vega. Thus, for the lack of a better name, we'll call this ship the RSI Integrity class cruiser. From what we can see, it's similar in design to the Bengal, but smaller, replacing the flight decks for what look like 3 separate size 12 bearing shipbuster railgun turrets. These railguns are some of the most devastating weapons humanity has ever created, capable of firing super dense projectiles at incredible speeds. Each individual railgun is said to be capable of coring a cruiser with a single shot. That would make the Integrity class one of the most dangerous capital ships active in the UEE Navy, likely capable of taking on most capital ships we know of in the game's universe. The other mystery ship doesn't have any references in lore, though some have suspected it to be the new and improved Pegasus escort carrier. There is evidence that the old design of the Pegasus is still canon though, and possibly still in service. So this is likely a brand new carrier, but is also likely classified as an escort carrier, which can be confusing since that's also what the Pegasus is. From what we can see, it seems to lack a lot of firepower of its twin cruiser variant, though it's also built off the design of the Bengal and contains at least one sort of runway hangar area. With that said, let's look at the other RSI escort carrier in the UEE Navy, the Pegasus class. This ship is described as the Empire's premier small carrier, capable of supporting operations of up to 32 starfighters far from supply lines. Typically, it will accommodate 16 Hornets and 16 Gladiators, but the fighter groups can be tailored to missions as demanded. In addition to the fighters, there are also 2 Argo MPUVs. It seems to have 8 turrets similar to the Javelin, making them twin-size 7s with additional twin-size 4 Gatlings for smaller targets. The Pegasus is sometimes used as a command center for a flight squadron. Its repair bays and accommodations are able to support those on board during long-term missions. In addition to providing protective escort for ship convoys, Pegasuses are used for fighter transportation, fleet support, and hunter-killer missions. The only Pegasus known to exist is the UEES Chimera, a ship Randall Graves served on when he was in the UEE Navy. Next, we'll talk about the Queen of the Fleet, the mighty fleet carrier, the RSI Bengal. Sitting at almost a kilometer in length with a crew of at least 476, this behemoth of the UEE Navy is the centerpiece of almost every fleet. There, it seems to serve a dual role as carrier, with its support of multiple squadrons of fighters and bombers, including being capable of carrying the large, heavy Aegis Retaliator bombers, and battleship, with its quad turret of size 12 bearing shipbuster railguns, alongside over 50 manned and remote turrets ranging from size 6 to size 9. It has 2 whole decks dedicated to just storing and launching smaller craft, with enough space to park an Idris inside, though the entrance to this deck isn't large enough to allow the Idris to get in. These ships are almost always commanded by some version of admiral, and act as the anchor to most battle groups and larger fleets. Thus, there are much fewer in number than any of the other capital ships in the UEE Navy, well, except for one. The final and largest ship in the UEE Navy is the mighty Retribution-class Super Dreadnought. At almost 3 kilometers in length, it is one of the largest ships in the known universe. In fact, it's larger than most terraforming platforms that we've seen thus far. While its full armament and crew is classified, observations of the ship indicate that it likely has 14 size 12 shipbusters, along with likely over 100 smaller weapons batteries, and a curious front that may be an even larger main gun built into the superstructure of the ship itself. The Retribution began life as Project Wadim, before the start of the Vanduul War, under strict secrecy. Due to financial problems, the construction of the ship was initially delayed, though in 2943 the superstructure was almost completed. After the Battle of Vega in 2945, rumors began to swirl in the media about a reported kingship killer being made by multiple ship manufacturers working together. Sometime in 2946, the ship was officially announced and assigned to the 65th Battle Group and participated in the Battle of Oberon, though it didn't see much, if any, conflict. The Retribution seems to be the culmination of UEE's study of Vanduul ships and culture to build a ship specifically to counter the feared Vanduul kingship. It is the unrivaled empress of the fleet, though it has yet to see pitched combat against the Vanduul. When it does, it's clear its main role is to tackle the heavy Vanduul kingships in order to annihilate it and cause the remaining Vanduul to flee or become disorganized. Now, let's get started with the ships that make up the core of shipping and logistics of the Navy, starting with the Hull series. The backbone of both civilian and military shipping, the Hull series was first released in 2802. At the time, the UEE was in dire straits. The overthrow of the Messers meant that many ships and part companies were essentially gone, leaving civilian logistics in shambles. In response, the UEE government had begun to cannibalize their own logistics fleets in order to prevent an economic catastrophe, crippling the logistics of the Navy along the way. As a result of all of this, the newly formed merger between Utho Electronics and the Musashi Lifestyle Design Unit spin-off of Acorn Limited developed the Hull series as a means to fill the vacuum of cargo vessels. The initial line ran from the small Hull A to the massive Hull D, releasing the super freighter the Hull E shortly afterwards in 2820. While the ship was mostly focused on civilian logistics, the UEE government quickly took to the ship as a means to help them deliver bulk cargo as well. Thus, the hulls of the Navy vary from possibly 125 meters to 372 meters long, capable of hauling anywhere between 4,608 and 98,304 SCU of freight. While it is a bit nebulous as to what version of the Hull series the Navy uses, there are only two named military variants at this time: the Hull D, which has the call sign of R4M Quasar, and the Hull E, which has the call sign of R5M Proteus. Both are mentioned as being used by the UEE Starlift Command, a joint operation between the Navy, Army, and Marines for logistics and transport purposes. Speaking of Starlift Command, next let's look at the pride of Starlift Command, the premier tactical starlifter itself, the Crusader M2 Hercules. In the mid-28th century, the UEE military was analyzing the failures of the Second Tevaran War. They quickly realized that the modern battlefield required a means to deliver armored vehicles, artillery, troops, and supplies directly to the ground, and be able to redeploy those assets quickly. In response, they came up with Starlift Command to handle these duties. But the aging vessels of the Meso era and the fragile bulk freighters of Misk weren't suited for this reality. Thus, a formal request for a proposal for a new ship to meet these needs was issued in 2814. It asked for a large, well-protected transport that was jump-capable, able to sustain concentrated artillery fire, and able to deploy multiple armored vehicles quickly. Significant proposals were developed by both Aegis Dynamics and Crusader Industries. Crusader, then a premier manufacturer of civilian starliners and associated industrial conversions, was expected to adapt their serving Saturn-class starliner for combat operations. Aegis was expected to develop a bespoke design specific to the UEEN's needs. In an unexpected twist, the opposite proved true. Aegis suggested adapting existing military freighters with armor and defensive turrets, while Crusader developed a much more expensive proposal to create an entirely new design that would eventually become the Hercules Starlifter. Despite Crusader's proposal having 3 times the price tag of Aegis's conversion, the feeling was that such a major reorganization of tactical doctrine would be better supported with an entirely new spacecraft. With that, Crusader Industries launched an all-out 4-year program to develop their first dedicated military support spacecraft. The first active-duty Starlifter unit was formed in May of 2821, dubbed the 84th Starlifter Squadron, with a dozen first-model spacecraft which would formally be designated as the M2 Hercules Starlifter. Coming at a length of 70 meters with a width of 94 meters and a height of 23 meters, the ship is very tall and has a surprisingly large wingspan. Additionally, the ship is capable of transporting 522 SCU of cargo, several ground vehicles of various sizes, or any combination of the two. Due to its unique role and silhouette, starmen and Marines affectionately call the ship Mama Bird. In initial training exercises, the ship worked perfectly, capable of taking sustained fire and deploying a tank or armored car in minutes. The Hercules met the military requirements and then some, with the icing on the cake being the size of the crew required to operate the M2, a measly 1 to 3, meaning a small number of starmen could deliver a much greater amount of troops and materiel to the front lines. Ever since, the M2 has become a staple of military actions all over the Empire, with Navy pilots often flying the Mama Birds for Joint Starlift Command. Related to the M2 is another transport, this time more focused on troops than supplies. The Anvil Valkyrie. First released in 2812, the Anvil Valkyrie is an armored landing craft, officially designated a heavy dropship. It comes in at 48 meters long, 38 meters wide, and 12 meters in height. It carries both the sophisticated defenses of a dropship while still maintaining some of the size and deployment capabilities of larger designs like the M2, able to hold a Cyclone or Ursa rover. It is manned by a pilot and 4 gunners, who sport a bristling array of weapons able to be brought to bear at any opponent. In order to transport its human cargo to the front lines, an array of 20 sophisticated G-couches keep individual soldiers harnessed during the ride to the surface, and VTOL thrusters allow the ship to land and quickly deploy troops and equipment on rough terrain, no larger than the ship's own base. Although the Valkyrie has not yet been used for mass invasion, the design has already repeatedly proven itself in combat in frontier regions. After-action reports specifically praise the ability to immediately deploy an armored vehicle, itself a great improvement over smaller gunships. The ship has become a favorite of UEE Navy pilots, and it is considered the best way to travel by soldiers deploying in hostile situations. Related to the Valkyrie, the premier boarding craft of the UEE Navy is the Anvil Legionnaire. This ship was the brainchild of one Grot Taylor, a lead engineer who recently had been lured away from MISC with the promise of his own project. Taylor was somewhat unusual for a military-focused Anvil designer, because he was staunchly opposed to war in general, regularly speaking about the helplessness he felt about the role spacecraft manufacturers played in propping up the Messer administration. In spite of these beliefs, Taylor considered himself the right man for the job. Perfecting boarding craft would save lives by protecting the soldiers involved and by allowing the crews of larger ships to surrender instead of supporting a system designed to destroy as much equipment as possible. He went to work immediately, starting with the plans for classic planetary assault ships like the Valkyrie and working laboriously to adapt every piece to space-to-space docking maneuvers. He proposed this idea to the Navy, who was looking for a boarding solution after a high-profile failure to stop a pirate gang turned into a PR disaster, with over 20 dead, including an entire platoon of Marines. His design impressed the Navy so much that they took the project. Not long after, engineers in the project were forced to pause overnight to receive higher than expected level of clearances, something that confused everyone involved at Anvil. The reason for the secrecy under which the rest of the Legionnaire's development was conducted has officially remained classified, although third-party reports suggest it was because the Navy unexpectedly made available a partially complete Vandal Cleaver boarding craft for the team at Anvil to examine during the development process, a claim that both Anvil and the Navy deny. The first Legionnaire prototype flew the next year, with a full squadron of production test models being activated in 2922. Coming in at a length of 32 meters, a width of 23.3 meters, and a height of 10.2 meters, the ship was actually smaller than the previous go-to boarding ships of the fleet. The ship has a 2-deck armored design that could dock directly with another craft's hull, and proved promising very early on. Pilots and crew have raved about the ship's careful interior design, and its bulky protective armor that seems so obviously intended to keep them as safe as possible. A claim proven when a training accident caused a Legionnaire to literally shear apart in Earth's atmosphere, only to safely crash land without a single casualty. Since then, the ship has proven itself in countless actions to be exactly what the Navy needed to board and seize ships. Next, we'll look at some of the pure support ships of the Navy, involved in repair and resupply in the field. Starting with one of the oldest ships in the fleet, the Aegis Vulcan. In 2590, innovations in fuel refinement allowed ships to go further and longer than ever before, so the Navy requested proposals for a medium-sized support spacecraft with the flexibility to conduct both refueling and rearm operations on the front lines. Because this was at the height of the Messer era, Aegis Dynamics was given the contract. The Vulcan comes in at 38.5 meters long, 16.5 meters wide, and 10 meters tall. With a crew of 3, it has a low crew count comparatively to the range of missions it could accomplish. What the Navy calls the 3 Rs: rearming, refueling, and repairing. Its main purpose is to deliver the 3 Rs in situ and in the field, often during combat situations, making the job of Vulcan crews very dangerous. The early versions of the ship were very different from the modern versions, requiring the crew to EVA to repair or rearm ships, and used a primitive fuel boom to refuel both quantum and hydrogen fuel. As time went on, the ship underwent many great advancements until the modern version was released, likely sometime in the 28th century. This version was the first to be released with the Bard drone technology, which allowed for remote operation of the 3 Rs. These drones can be configured for any of the 3 main roles, and allow for other ships to be aided on the move, making jobs of Vulcan crews much less dangerous. Vulcans have recently been pressed to service in greater numbers than ever before, both in their traditional roles as fleet support, with multiple Vulcans often assigned to closely follow destroyer and cruiser squadrons, and in what the UEE Navy calls ranged strike groups, in an attempt to relieve pressure from the Vanduul. These strike groups consist of base-launched fighters and bombers supported by modern Vulcans to significantly extend their range and striking power, allowing them to deploy into enemy-held territory to conduct raids and be resupplied quickly to continue their operations. The other major support ship of the UEE Navy is actually a militarization of a civilian ship, and a joint project between MISC and Aegis, the Starfarer Gemini. The Starfarer was first built in 2875 and was a great success for MISC, proving their diligent, albeit slow, market research was a valuable way to produce their ships. As such, in 2895, MISC began studying another potential role for the Starfarer, as a key element in the then ongoing efforts to modernize the Navy's supply chain. Struggling with increased Vanduul attacks, the Navy had been recently forced to double back by protecting previously unassailed fuel and munitions routes with escort carriers and destroyer squadrons that were sorely needed on the front lines. A faster, more maneuverable, and better armed tanker based on the Starfarer would then have the potential to not only bring in significant profits for MISC, but also save human lives. The company developed an expensive, elaborately researched pitch that was presented as a speculative bid to the Navy for the Q3 2899 budget. However, the bid was roundly rejected within weeks of the presentation, confusing all who took part. It was clear that this was not even a case of a competing spacecraft beating them to the punch, as the military continued to have no replacement in sight for its Meser-era tanker fleets. MISC management then strongly believed that the reputation of their company was the true cause for the rejection. You see, MISC had provided whole ships in limited numbers to the military before, but otherwise it was not a Navy contractor. The Starfarer and the earlier transports were strongly associated with civilian operations by the general public, and the belief was that the review board had not taken the proposal seriously since they didn't see MISC as a serious military contractor. To get around this, MISC moved to partner with a company that already had a strong relationship with the Navy, but was also in desperate needs themselves: Aegis Dynamics, the Navy's former prime aerospace contractor. Aegis had been working on improving its reputation over the last few years and was slowly winning back support. So the two companies developed a profit-sharing agreement under which Aegis would receive full rights to manufacture and sublicense a new variant of the Starfarer that would be offered to the military. This variant became known as the G2M Starfarer Gemini, coming in at a length of 101 meters, a width of 46.5 meters, and a height of 23.5 meters, sporting a crew of 6 and an additional cargo capacity of 295 SCU. This version of the Starfarer shared much of its design with the civilian one. It has the capacity to support a squadron of Hornets on a multi-system combat assignment. It can even gather and refine fuel in its own bespoke refuel refineries, though the Gemini does trade some of the cargo capacity and maneuverability in exchange for reinforced armor, increased shielding, more powerful engines, and stronger versions of the 3-manned turrets. The Gemini also includes an optional missile pod, which can be swapped out for the fuel intake unit on the ship's nose. Last, but certainly not least of these support ships, is the Anvil Crucible. Not a lot is known about this ship at this time, and even its size could change in the future, but it's designed as a pure repair ship for the UEE Navy. A so-called flying toolbox, the Crucible is Anvil Aerospace's first dedicated repair ship, featuring a rotating control bridge and a detachable pressurized workspace nicknamed the Scarab. The Crucible is a versatile mobile garage equipped with repair arms, a drone operations center, and all of the equipment needed to overhaul a damaged craft back into fighting shape. With an array of repair equipment, the Crucible can fully repair a heavily damaged Hornet within minutes, allowing the dogfighter to return to action. Larger ships can also be repaired using the external repair arms and an array of drones. The enclosed repair bay can magnetically lock down a damaged ship and enclose it in a pressurized bay. This allows for the repair crew easier access to the ship and lets the Crucible transport the ship through jump points and even repair enclosed ships while moving. The repair bay is also detachable, giving the Crucible a small boost in speed and maneuverability, either for repairing larger ships or to escape a dangerous situation. When it comes to fixing up starmen, the Navy turns to one of the most well-loved ships of the fleet, the RSI Apollo. First built in the 27th century, the Apollo is renowned for its life-saving abilities, operating on the front lines to help rescue and heal downed starmen from the vacuum of space. Coming in at a length of 43 meters, a width of 30 meters, and a height of 10 meters, and a crew of 2, the ship offers an amazing medical package. The innovative modular layout of the Apollo's medical bays permits maximum efficiency and tailored levels of medical support to suit all levels of projected severity, while also supporting a more balanced configuration for patrol and emergency response. The Apollo is designed to get in and out with speed and efficiency, required for rescue, medevac, and mixed emergency applications. With VTOL thrusters, dual shield generators, and a patent shock balance system which allows for surgery conditions in the most dangerous of situations. Adding to its flexibility, the Apollo comes equipped with 2 MedLift semi-automated emergency extraction pods, each capable of lifting up to 226 kilograms quickly and securely from ground to ship. Each drone is outfitted with payload preservation armor, auto gyro stabilization, and shock balance absorption technology to maximize patient safety and comfort through extraction. Another main medical ship of the UEE Navy is the MISC Endeavour Hope. This is another ship we don't know a lot about, but it is a configuration of the modular MISC Endeavour series of ships. The Hope-class hospital ship is employed by the UEE and other organizations as battlefield support, capable of getting Marines and pilots back into the battle as quickly as possible. When outfitted as a hospital, the Endeavour's docking bay is capable of maintaining a single Cutlass Red ambulance. The last of the non-combat sub-cap ships is probably one of the more well-known ones, the Anvil Carrack. Released in 2822, this dedicated long-range explorer vessel comes in at a length of 126.5 meters, a width of 76.5 meters, and a height of 30 meters with a crew of 4 to 6. The ship is designed to be entirely self-sufficient for long-term exploration, complete with reinforced fuel tanks for long-duration flight, an advanced jump drive, an auto-dock medical bed, repair facilities, and a mapping-oriented sensor suite. The military Carracks logged hundreds of discoveries, including full surveys of countless moons, comets, jump points, and asteroid fields, and they continue to be actively produced and used today. Built as an explorer first, the Carrack has the shipboard facilities and crew stations to allow for in-depth research missions while maintaining the lower profile and necessary performance for facing particularly hazardous and uncharted regions of space. Let's finish off this list with the more combat-focused sub-capital ships of the fleet, starting with the fan favorite, Redeemer gunship. Sadly, there isn't much known about the origins of the ship or the lore reasons behind its unique, very non-ageist design style. What we do know is that it comes in at a length of 51 meters, a width of 25 meters, and a height of 14 meters, and a crew of 4. This makes it far more portable as a gunship than the other two large gunships, the Hammerhead and the Perseus. This means it can be loaded into transports and carriers to extend its operational distance. Adding to this, the ship's ability to act as an ad hoc dropship capable of carrying a small number of ground troops expands its role greatly. Its dual-manned turrets located at the top and bottom of the vessel, as well as a pair of remote turrets at the nose and tail, are strategically positioned to deliver swift and precise offensive power. A pair of guns under the wings, as well as missile racks, give the pilot weaponry when needed. The unique thruster design of the vector lock engines enables an unprecedented amount of mass manipulation by positioning the twin nacelles at an optimal locations away from the ship's center of gravity. This creates the benefit of increasing the overall stability of the vessel, as well as expanding the combat maneuvers available to the pilot. The nacelle-based system utilizes the exposed surface area to draw heat away from vital system parts and directly into the environment, thus minimizing possible wear and increasing overall engine performance. Next is the older but arguably more popular gunship of the fleet, the RSI Perseus. The ship comes in at a length of 100 meters, a width of 50 meters, a height of 21 meters, and a crew of 6. Originally intended for blockade duty, it evolved into the role of a solo patrol ship when it was first built in 2520. Over 400 years before the events of Squadron 42, this ship was designed to go far, look mean, and take a punch. Built before shield technology could be equipped on smaller vessels, the Perseus has much thicker armor than most ships of its size, and thus is slower but harder to kill. Its primary targets are sub-capital ships, and as such the Perseus is outfitted with 4 massive size 7 cannons, supported by 2 smaller remote turrets and a launch bay of 20 size 5 torpedoes. The ship officially was retired in 2863, but the few left in service proved themselves in the Battle of Oberon, the year after the attack on Vega II. The aging Perseus UES Achilles managed to take down 2 Vanduul destroyers before the ship was damaged beyond repair. This was likely due to its thick armor and reliance on ballistic size 7s, which allowed it to take hits other ships of its size would be crippled by, while returning withering fire that was unable to be intercepted. Due to its amazing performance during the battle, Admiral Ernst Bishop personally lobbied RSI to start production of Perseus models once more, for use against the Vanduul, which began again in 2950. The last of the gunships of the UEE fleet is the picket and patrol ship, the Aegis Hammerhead. At least partially designed by famed Anvil Aerospace founder J. Harris Arnold, the Hammerhead was designed from its outset to take down fighters and torpedoes and act as a flak screen for larger fleets in the UEE. Coming in at a length of 120 meters, a width of 72 meters, and a height of 16 meters with a crew of 9, the ship bristles with an impressive array of firepower, with 6 manned quad-linked turrets. These turrets are optimized for anti-fighter and anti-ordnance work, and grant the ship an unparalleled ability to put up a hailstorm of firepower that swiftly removes any smaller aerospace threats. The Hammerhead is thus well suited for supporting larger capital ships in a fleet or to act as a general patrol vessel in lower intensity theaters. Built in 2773, the ship has undergone 5 refits over the years to improve its design, though it was a marked improvement over the old Gwyn-class gunships, which served the same role previously and were merely civilian ships converted for military use. The Hammerhead has gone on to prove its worth in many engagements with the Vanduul, including a famous skirmish when a full box of 16 Hammerheads fought off a full clan of Vanduul attacking a squadron of civilian hull ships. Though suffering a loss of 4 Hammerheads, the ships were able to destroy a Vanduul destroyer and fend off the clan. The last of the ships in this list is another old one. Built in 2549, the Aegis Nautilus mine layer is a ship steeped in mystery. The ship was built in the aftermath of the First Devaran War, when mine laying was done by ad hoc civilian conversion ships, which proved dangerous and inefficient. Aegis interviewed these crews and developed a ship which would emphasize accuracy over volume with their mine placements, and would eventually become known as the Nautilus. Coming in at a length of 125 meters, a width of 72 meters, and a height of 21.6 meters, it is the largest of the sub-cap combat vessels of the fleet. With a crew of 8, the ship can both defend itself with 2 turrets and a front-mounted size 7 emplacement, and deliver 3 different types of deployables, from homing mines, sentry mines, and the Nemo recovery drone, designed to return the mines back to the ship. The Nautilus is used in squadrons of ships, which often operate in secrecy in deep-range missions or behind enemy lines to deploy mines to prevent retreat or slow advance of enemy forces. As a result, the ship saw action almost immediately after the ship had been released and has continued service in the UEE Navy since, being involved in almost every major engagement and event in UEE naval history since 2549, where it played a pivotal role in the UEE's success. Next up, let's look at the bombers of the UEE Navy, the often overlooked but invaluable part of UEE naval doctrine. With that in mind, we have to start with one of the most successful ships in the history of humanity, the Boeing B-52 Stratofortress. Okay, that's a joke. One I hope CIG actually adds into the universe at some point. But the Aegis Dynamics Retaliator is actually comparable to the B-52, in that they are both insanely old, likely not getting put out of service anytime soon, and are invaluable and flexible strategic bombers. Built during the height of the First Tavaran War in 2944, the Retaliator was a quantum jump in ship design. The previous generation of bombers, nicknamed the Raken, was famously hated by its operators. Lieutenant Commander Warden Fleeler famously said, "The Raken flies like a tug, got no give on the sides. Sure, it can carry bulk to cause a lot of hurt, but that doesn't matter if you get clipped before the drop." Its flaws were ruthlessly exploited by the more nimble and better protected Tavaran Talon, who became the bane of every Raken crew during the early days of the war. The military needed a replacement for the ship that could deploy faster than a capital ship, could access a wider variety of jump points, and could still deliver payloads of near equal size and devastation. So, when the young Aegis Dynamics was given the contract for this ship, they tasked the now legendary ship designer, Aaron Tracy, to come up with a plan. Famously, Tracy started the design brief of the ship that would become the Retaliator by saying, "We need a ship to stalk and damage heavy prey." To do that, they took a radical first step to interview Raken crews to find out what they wanted from the next generation bomber. Combining that with the needs of the Navy, they created a revolution in not only bombers, but human-designed ships. This pilot-centered approach allowed for the ship to be flown more like a fighter than a larger ship, with a single operator at the front, flying and often targeting the ship's torpedoes. Torpedoes launched by a revolutionary new rotary launch system. This rotary launcher gave the ship its first unofficial nickname of the Roto by its crews. It may even be the first small human vessel to support a Tavaran-style energy shield. The Retaliator would end up very small for a ship of its time, coming out of the length of 21 meters, a width of 53 meters, and a height of 9.5 meters. The Retaliator was an astonishing achievement given the limitations in technology at the time. Bristling with 5-man turrets on top of its complement of torpedoes, it had more firepower than most ships of its size at the time of its creation, and went on to be one of the defining ships of the First Tavaran War. While a formidable foe on its own, a fleet of Retaliators has time and again proved to be more than a match for a larger class ship. It has undergone upgrades over the years since its integration, and dozens if not hundreds of new models have also been created since its initial release. One notable example being the 2783 Retaliator made by famed designer Juliette Maupin, who would go on to create the weapons that inspired Apocalypse Arms. Continuing our look at the bombers of the UEE Navy, let's look at the UEE's premier carrier-based torpedo bomber, which started life as a scam. The Anvil Gladiator. Originally named the Anvil T-3A Gladiator, the ship was designed specifically for what was known as the MVT project. In 2889, a newly formed development firm, Craig Levine Accelerator, made a highly classified presentation to the UEE Navy. It claimed to have developed a radical spacecraft-based munition that would kick off an entirely new generation of ship-guided weaponry. The promised guided bomb, the aforementioned MVT, was said to possess incredible capabilities. Not only was the missile itself nearly completely invisible to sensors, but the patented warhead could scan and, quote, skip directly through the opposing target's shields. Firing the MVT had one small caveat, though. It would require the launching bomber to maintain a specialized laser lock on the target through to detonation, meaning that it would not be particularly effective on larger spacecraft like the standard Retaliator, which required a specifically built ship, which would become known as the T-3A Gladiator. The only issue is that the MVT was a lie. It was just a regular torpedo with off-the-shelf electronics that did none of what Craig Levine claimed. But by the time the UEE Navy realized their mistake, they had already built the custom ship designed to fire this wonder weapon, 144 of them to be exact. So with a bunch of brand new state-of-the-art bombers built, the Navy now had to find a way to adapt them effectively to a new role. Renamed to the Anvil T-8A Gladiator, the ship comes in at a length of 22.75 meters, a width of 21 meters, and a height of 6 meters, making it almost the same size as the F-7A Hornet, and likely made from similar parts of the already wildly popular and extensively produced fighter. The ship itself was now envisioned as a kind of two-crew mix between the Retaliator and a Hornet that could drop unguided munitions, but also adequately protect itself during attack runs thanks to higher speed and maneuverability. While it took some time to shine, the Gladiator proved itself effective in a number of combat and support roles, ranging from direct strikes on both capital ships and planetary installations to sensor spoofing wild weasel runs. Gladiators have conducted countless successful operations and have taken the #1 slot for the amount of gross tonnage of enemy shipping destroyed per spacecraft type. Gladiators have also adapted to serve in a number of other roles, with a variety of service conversions to the bomb bay, allowing for mounting of special mission packages like long-range snoopers and data transfer arrays. Lastly, with the bombers, let's take a look at the premier stealth bomber of the UEE Navy, the Aegis Dynamics Eclipse. Project Eclipse was the brainchild of Imperator Coley. At the time, the administration felt that despite the efforts to mend ties with the Xi'an, the species' longer lives resulted in lingering hostilities towards the UEE because of humanity's actions under the previous measure regime. Imperator Coley requested bids for a classified stealth bomber to have as a cautionary defensive measure should another Cold War arise between the humans and the Xi'an. However, it seems the project never got past the planning stages, and in 2930, the UEE Navy was in need of a more advanced stealth bomber to use specifically in defensive operations against the Vanduul. Military casualties were mounting in cases of direct combat with Vanduul capital ships, and the Navy needed a ship that could strike quickly before the enemy detected their presence or soften up strategic targets in anticipation for a larger attack. Project Eclipse looked like to be the perfect candidate. So, Aegis Dynamics was given the green light to make it a reality. Coming in at a length of 24.5 meters, a width of 24.5 meters, and a height of 5 meters, the Eclipse is an impressive package for its compact size. The aero design, massive firepower, and cutting-edge clandestine technology of the ship stood out to the UEE warplanners almost instantly. The Eclipse's advanced hull system is adaptable to environments thanks to multiple wing configurations that adjust to space or atmospheric flight. Its primary purpose is to be a mid-range stealth bomber, capable of sneaking behind enemy lines and delivering a high-damage strike. The ship is designed to approach a target silently, fire its payload, and leave. The Eclipse carries 3 size 9 torpedoes and 2 size 2 ballistic Gatling weapons. After 2 years of extensive field tests, the Aegis Eclipse went into service in 2932. Since its introduction during Operation Lighthammer, it has distinguished itself as the most advanced stealth bomber in the UEE arsenal. with over 36 successful operations, mostly being used in stealth and tactical bombing operations and primarily for defensive measures performed by the UEE Navy. The Hercules A-2 is a bomber and gunship modification of the Hercules M2. The A-2 was the brainchild of Crusader's longtime CEO Kelly Kaplan. Kaplan was once a ship designer for Crusader, where she helped develop the famous Crusader Genesis starliner. Part of that ship's creation was the frame and roll design process, which allowed for multiple specific variants of a ship to be built alongside their generic counterparts on the same assembly line. Sometime before 2940, she applied her famous frame and roll technique to the venerable Hercules. This would result in many interesting and unique variants of the M2, including a refueler and an information runner. The idea being that Crusader could design a specific use variant for the Navy as needed without the increased cost of a bespoke spacecraft. However, the most iconic of these variants was one that grew from being a temporary addition to a permanent one on the Navy roster, the A-2. Coming in at a length of 94 meters, a width of 70 meters, and the height of 23 meters, this dedicated heavy gunship was created with the M2's dependable armor and added more weapons, specifically 6 size 4 twin remote turrets and 2 size 5 pilot-controlled weapons, a significant upgrade from the M2. The A-2 also sacrifices part of the transportation ability of the M2 for a dedicated bomb deployment system called the Morningstar Massive Ordnance Rig, which, as a paired set, mounts 4 of the infamous Firestorm Kinetics Colossus bombs, or the unreleased Daisy Chain Saturation Rig, which will mount 60 Firestorm Kinetics Thunderball bombs. The A-2 proved so popular that it quickly became part of the Starlift Command, seeing multiple combat deployments alongside the M2, proving to be a great supplement to Starlift Command and earning itself a permanent rotation in the fleet. With bombers out of the way, let's discuss the true glory hounds of the verse, the fighters, beginning with the light fighters and working our way up. Let's start with the cornerstone of UEE fighter design, one of the oldest ships still in use by the fleet and one of the most useful, the Aegis Dynamics P5G Gladius. This will be a brief summary of the ship. If you're interested in a more in-depth look, I did a spotlight video for it, which I will link in the top right. What we know as the P5G Gladius started life as the Aegis Dynamics Wildcat, coming in at a length of 21 meters, a width of 17.5 meters, and a height of 5.5 meters. The Wildcat is quite small compared to others that came before it, which allowed it to be designed with forward-swept wings and control surfaces to allow for atmospheric control, maneuvering thrusters to allow for both vacuum and atmospheric control, and 2 main hydrogen-burning thrusters. The true genius of the design was its adaptation of civilian-style modularity into fighter design, the first of its kind. This allowed the Wildcat to be quickly upgraded or outfitted for other missions without requiring a longer stay in the hangar for a refit. This also meant that it could incorporate the revolution in armament, cooling, power plant, and shield technology that was occurring in the post-war period. This made the ship one of the smallest ever ships to be equipped with both a quantum drive and a shield. Coming just 30 years after the end of the First Tavaran War in 2589, the first model of this new ship represented Aegis's integration of all the lessons now thoroughly studied from that war. Its primary role was for that of a service aboard smaller capital ships that weren't outfitted for full-scale aerospace operations, to give the ships greater scouting and strike ranges. The name Gladius was a direct result of the first Imperator, Ivar Messer. He didn't like the name Wildcat and was in the process of consolidating power, which would lead to the dictatorial Messer era, which would last hundreds of years. One of the ways he was doing this was by linking his own rise to power to that of ancient Rome, and to that end, he wanted the ship renamed to the Gladius. He saw a benefit in presenting the new type of fighter as being the common, quote, sword of the people, unquote. The ship went on to prove its worth in the Second Tavaran War and beyond. For a time, it was also the go-to fighter to counter the Vandal threat, with pilots from the all-Gladius 36th Fighter Squadron developing techniques like the carry and leap and the weave-style maneuvers. However, the last service pack of the ship was pushed out in 2943, as the UEE Navy has begun to retire the fighter for newer models as they adapt to the modern external Vandal threat, along with growing internal outlaw and rebellion threats. Still, despite its age, the ship is extensively used by military and civilian forces alike, and will be the primary ship we get to fly in Squadron 42. Let's next talk about the ship that is likely replacing the Gladius in the light fighter role in the UEE Navy, the Anvil Arrow. The Anvil Arrow is a light fighter that acts as a patrol and scout ship. Light and fast, but with enough armament to hold its own, it comes in at a length of 17.25 meters, a width of 12.25 meters, and a height of 4.5 meters, with wings that fold up for storage, making it incredibly compact compared to the larger, wider, and taller Gladius. High angular velocity makes the Arrow more maneuverable than the Gladius, but sacrifices linear velocity. Its smaller profile and sturdy frame aids its survival, but makes it less capable in atmosphere. It also has a weapons package comparable to the Gladius, but dropping one of the size 3 hardpoints and instead installing a twin size 1 turret. From the light fighters, let's move on to the only medium fighter in the UEE Navy, and one of the most well-regarded fighters in UEE history, the Anvil F-7A Hornet. Coming in at a length of 22.5 meters, a width of 22 meters, and a height of 7 meters, the Hornet was a revolution in medium fighter design. The emphasis of balance between firepower, speed, survivability, and maneuverability made the Hornet one of the best ships ever built. It found instant success inside the UEE Navy and Marines, who sung their praises from almost the moment it was released. The biggest advocate for the ship was probably one of the most famous pilots and commanders of Squadron 42, Reily. Arya served in Squadron 42 for 8 years, and she was promoted to the commanding officer of Squadron 42 and its carrier, the UES Caspian. During Arya's early tours as a combat pilot, she obsessively tested all of the ships that she was assigned, meticulously testing various loadouts and configurations to push the limits of the ship. For one reason or another, all of the ships would ultimately fail her rigorous series of tests, until she tackled the Anvil Hornet. She recalled in an interview, quote, "There wasn't a scenario or loadout that I could put the Hornet through that it couldn't find its way out of. Like the damn ship was doomed to succeed." Arya Riley's F-7A Hornet was nicknamed the Wildfire and became her mainstay ship and her default configuration. The ship was her go-to for missions that required her to handle unknown situations in the field. The ship has gone on to continue to prove its adaptability, becoming the go-to as a multi-role carrier fighter. It even had a complete overhaul in 2944, creating the Mark II, which improves the design significantly, taking everything that the team at Anvil had learned since the original Hornet and incorporating it into an updated package. Next, let's look at the heavy fighters of the fleet, starting with one of the oldest that is still operating, the Anvil A4A Hurricane. While it's currently manufactured by Anvil Aerospace, it was the brainchild of another designer from the company that inspired the Anvil brand, that of Case Aerospace. The Devaran fleet of the Second Devaran War had undergone significant tech upgrades during their exodus, and the UEE naval forces were having a difficult time overcoming specifically the new phalanx shields. With the new and improved Talon known as the Shrike and the tandem ship known as the Jackal, amongst other innovations, all able to equip this nigh indestructible shield technology. In 2605, Navy officials called upon the Empire ship manufacturers for a solution. Though he had never worked on a combat ship before, Leonard Case knew the credits to such a lucrative contract could save his company. So he set about designing the solution to humanity's current problems. Analyzing battle footage of naval forces engaging the Devaran led Case to the conclusion that trying to overwhelm the phalanx shields was a losing proposition. The bulk of the damage that the Navy was able to inflict occurred when a Devaran ship was caught entirely off guard, Because of this, the goal of his design would be to increase the frequency with which these opportunities would occur and maximize the damage inflicted during them. To help his ship achieve this goal, he borrowed a page from the enemy's playbook. Having observed combat footage of the Jackal, where one operator piloted the ship while the other manually rotated the shields to deflect incoming enemy fire, he thought of creating a reverse Jackal. His ship would also be manned by a team, a pilot and a turret gunner. The design he submitted to the Navy stood in sharp contrast to those submitted by industry leaders like Aegis, and it surprised many when the Navy granted a contract to the unusual contender. Case Aerospace immediately began work on what would become the A4A Hurricane. Coming in at a length of 22 meters, a width of 14.5 meters, and a height of 6 meters, the Hurricane is rather small. It is only slightly larger than the Gladius, but shorter and with similar width than the iconic light fighter, meaning it can fit in most transports for the Gladius already built. It also packs an impressive amount of firepower, with the pilot having 2 size 4 weapons and 8 size 2 missiles, while the turret gunner has access to 4 size 4s, typically ballistics. This setup has made the Hurricane one of the most brutal ships in the UEE, able to tackle all but capital ship shields with ease. Launched in late 2607, the Hurricane suffered some setbacks during the testing phase, though pilots liked the power-to-weight ratio and the extra punch the quad turret offered. The high degree of coordination needed between the pilot and gunner had a very steep learning curve. Because of this, the Hurricane didn't enter active combat until 2609. While they were used to devastating effect in a few instrumental actions, the war ended shortly after their deployment in 2610, thanks to the actions of Squadron 42 at the Battle of Centauri. While it served with the UEE Navy for some time after the war, it was eventually retired after Case died in a mid-flight collision. Though Case's work would eventually go on to influence the founder of Anvil, one Jude Harris Arnold, it wasn't until the late 29th century, with a resurgent Vanduul threat, that the Hurricane would be brought back into active duty by Anvil and upgraded for the realities of modern warfare. Next, let's look at another major Anvil heavy hitter, the latest generation of modern UEE Navy fighters, the Anvil Aerospace F-8A Lightning. With the age of the F-7A beginning to show, and the Vanduul learning how to counter the legendary ship with their own upgraded and new designs, the Navy decided it was time to replace the aging Hornet. Thus, they created the next generation Starfighter project, and allowed companies from all over the UEE to submit their ships. Anvil, Aegis, and RSI all made their own bids. Aegis produced their Dogfighter 3000, which may likely have evolved into what we know today as the Sabre, and RSI produced their Black Widow, which may have been modified into becoming the Scorpius platform. However, the winner of this was Anvil, with what would become known as the F-8A Lightning Heavy Fighter. The Lightning was the result of over a century of study on the Vanduul way of war, and represents the most modern attempt at not just a space superiority fighter, but a specialized Vanduul killer. Coming in at 26 meters long, 24 meters wide, and 8 meters tall, it is only slightly larger than the Hornet. However, its triple thruster configuration and thruster placement make it more responsive than the older Hornet. Its sloping armor, 4 size 1 shields, 4 size 3 and 2 size 4 weapon hardpoints makes it able to take as much of a beating as it throws back. The F-8 Lightning began rolling out in 2933, slowly replacing older ship squadrons all over the Empire, to much acclaim. While the ship hasn't even today fully replaced the older squadrons of ships, it has begun to prove itself as dangerous as the legendary Hornets and Gladiuses that it's replacing. Lastly, let's take a look at one of the most adaptable fighter platforms of the fleet, the beloved Aegis Dynamics A3G Vanguard. Built as part of the second wave of Aegis Dynamics, started by the infamous CEO Hannah Chan, The Vanguard was the Navy's first attempt at a dedicated anti-Vanduul fighter platform. Coming in at a length of 48 meters, a width of 40 meters, and a height of 9.5 meters, the A3G Vanguard is a rather sizable ship. It serves as a multi-function deep space fighter. Trading some of the maneuverability you'd get from medium and light fighters, the Vanguard more than makes up for it with its operational range, defensive systems, and weapons packages. Over the years, it has become the go-to ship for intercept engagements in outlying areas where support from a carrier is not available. While all Vanguard classes come standard with 4 unique size 2 mounts and a size 5 mount on the nose, 4 size 4 missile racks, and a manned turret with 2 size 2 weapon mounts, the secret to its success is its modularity. The Vanguard has a unique swappable modular room that can alter the ship's role and make it more focused for specific missions. There are 4 variations of the Vanguard, which have their own battlefield upgrade kits, or bucks, and have their own production models: the Warden, Harbinger, Sentinel, and Hoplite. The Vanguard Warden is the standard configuration of the ship. It is a pure, long-range, heavy fighter, built for patrols deep into hostile space with little to no support. Its modular room is fitted with sleeping berths and reclamation facilities to support long-range missions that can last for days or weeks. The Vanguard Harbinger is UEE's standard fighter bomber, converting the standard Warden's model into a potent bomb bag, carrying 3 size 5 torpedoes. The extended range of the Vanguard and its relatively small profile mean it can go where carrier-based or larger strategic bombers don't, and then strike hard and make it back to frontier bases. The Vanguard Sentinel is an electronic warfare ship that's designed to fight smart instead of taking enemies head-on. The conversion features an AR cockpit, an external E-warfare pod, decoy missiles, and a set of EMP charges. Vanguard Sentinels often provide necessary combat support for combined operations. A lone Sentinel assigned Wild Weasel tasks is frequently paired with Harbinger bombers and Warden escorts for large attack missions. The Vanguard Hoplite is a cross between a Vanguard deep space fighter and a dedicated boarding ship. Adapting the reliable base design for combined operations, the Hoplite is designed to insert an armored strike team of up to 6 personnel into its target location and provide it with fire support until extraction. While the Navy uses the A3G extensively, it's found its main role with the UEE Marines, who love the adaptability of the space frame, allowing them to field 4 different roles with just a single ship chassis, reducing operations costs while also allowing them deep strike support in the theaters they most often operate from, those places cut off from support and a long way from the front lines. Now, the next few ships are ships that don't technically have a position in the UEE Navy, but have been used by the Navy or are associated with it, starting with the Aegis Sabre. The Aegis Dynamics Sabre is a single-seat fighter that was specifically built to accomplish 2 things. The first was to meet the standards set forth by the UEE to make a ship to counter the Vanduul Stinger heavy fighter. The second was to begin to claw back its military contracts from Anvil Aerospace. Ever since the fall of the Mezzers in 2791, Aegis has been in a bit of a weird place when it comes to military contracts. While much of its old stock was still being used and updated, like the Gladiator, Gladius, Idris, and Javelin, Aegis had only 2 military contracts between 2791 and 2945. The first being the barely referenced Wildcat, which beat out the original Cutlass for the Volksfighter program and has since faded into obscurity. Then the more memorable contract being the Eclipse, but that was a limited and highly classified project until very recently. This was because of their close connections with the dictatorial Mezzer regime. So when the new revolutionary government took over, all of Aegis contracts were either pared back or cancelled, with all new projects that had been granted to them being stripped. For instance, the Avenger medium carrier fighter. Since then, they've been saved by the almost unlikely of markets: civilians buying their tried and tested space frames for personal and militia use. with their most notable creation during this time being the gargantuan salvage ship, the Reclaimer. With their reputation having slowly been rebuilt, now after over 160 years since the fall of the Mezzers, they have finally made a big play when it came to the contract to replace the aging F-7A Hornet. Gambling big on this potential huge windfall, they poured research and development into a brand new space frame that they dubbed the Dogfighter 3000. Unfortunately for Aegis, their submission was passed over for the Anvil's F-8A Lightning. However, they did not give up, and when the UEE Navy was looking for a new submission to take on the Vanduul Stinger heavy fighter, they introduced the Sabre, likely a retooled version of their Dogfighter 3000. The Aegis Dynamic Sabre was first produced in 2945 and comes in at a length of 24 meters, a width of 26 meters, and a height of 5 meters. It is classified as a stealth medium fighter, and comes equipped with 4 size 3 weapon hardpoints, as well as 2 bespoke internal size 4 missile hardpoints capable of firing 4 size 3 missiles. With how Aegis has pivoted over the years, a version of the Sabre was offered for sale to the civilian market almost instantly when it was submitted for the UEE approval. While it's unknown if the ship was officially adopted by the UEE, a Sabre can be seen flying in Squadron 42 in the Battle of Vega II in 2945. So it is likely that at least a few Sabres have made their way into UEE Navy service. The next technically used ship that doesn't have a solid confirmation is the RSI Scorpius. While RSI doesn't have the kind of recent history of producing ships for the UEE Navy the way that companies like Anvil and Aegis does, it does have a long history, being one of the earliest ship manufacturers in human history, and the company that discovered quantum travel technology in the late 21st century. So when the UEE called for submissions to replace the F-7A, RSI tossed their bid into the ring alongside Aegis and Anvil with what is known as the RSI Black Widow heavy fighter. While it was passed over for the F-8A Lightning, the Black Widow may have continued to be developed, as we know of another program that seemingly started shortly after the rejected proposal in 2933, that of Project Scorpius. Coming in at a length of 24 meters, a width of 32 meters, and a height of 13 meters, the Roberts Space Industries Scorpius is a unique approach to the heavy fighter market. It utilizes the classic dual-seat design popularized by the Case Hurricane, with the second seat designed for the turret. However, instead of a static manned turret, RSI went for a remote turret attached to a rail to allow for positioning at the top, bottom, or rear of the ship. Additionally, both of the pilot and the gunner have access to the same size and number of weapons, 4 size 3 weapons hardpoints. Additionally, this heavy ship's unique convertible frame allows the ship to fold up into a long shape when landing, which expands into 4 wings in flight. This allows it to sit in smaller landing spaces than typical heavy fighters, making it a useful, modern carrier fighter, while also giving the ship higher maneuverability and cruising speed in both space and atmosphere. RSI took an additional unique approach to testing this new vehicle by giving them to several iconic military and civilian organizations to put through their paces, specifically the famed 999th Teth Squadron and the Civilian Defense Force. These ships eventually found themselves in the hands of the regular Navy as well, serving at least in Squadron 188, where its leader, Lieutenant Commander Gaba Werner, sang its praises as a dogfighter and a recon ship. While we do have evidence that this ship has served in some capacity in the Navy, like the Sabre, it has never been officially stated that it has been adopted by the military in an official capacity. Next, we'll look at the weirdest combat ship in the UEE Navy, one so good at its very specific role that it made itself basically obsolete with its first deployment. The Anvil U-9A Hawk. In August of 2935, the United Empire of Earth's High Command issued a set of tentative specifications for a new spacecraft role, a single-seat fighter oriented towards close-range dogfighting, logistics support, and ground attack missions. The idea, codenamed Brawler, was sourced to Aegis Dynamics, Anvil Aerospace, and Drake Interplanetary, who all submitted first-round bids for the contract. The Drake proposal, which called for an underwhelming rework of the existing Cutlass platform, was rejected out of hand. Aegis and Anvil's proposals each consisted of brand new designs. each tackling High Command's requests in a different way. Both were advanced to the next phase and were asked to produce a prototype. From the start, Aegis's proposal, nicknamed the Bearcat, seemed the likely victor. The company funneled over $1 billion credits into a custom-tooled space frame intended to exactly meet the multi-role specifications. Anvil, with a more limited budget, opted to develop a spacecraft that shares several expensive components used in their active Hornet lineup. Although this move was considered risky, their thinking was that the consolidation of shared parts would make their prototype the most appealing long-term option, even if it could not match the Bearcat in every performance category. The result was the Hawk, a spacecraft best described by her first test pilot, Macy Push Gregg, as, quote, overpowered, overgunned, and under budget. The ship comes in at 17 meters long, 22 meters wide, and 6.5 meters tall, making it very compact given its origin as a Hornet kitbash. Built around a larger-than-expected power plant, the Hawk team opted to trade engine performance for a full set of 6 cannons. While the Hawk shared components and construction methods with the Hornet, one difference was immediately visible: variable geometry wings, intended to allow the spacecraft to better operate from forward bases and short runways. In January 2937, both prototypes were transferred to the Reckless 999th Test Squadron and deployed to the Godiva Lake facility for a full comparative performance program. It was here that the wisdom of Anvil's approach was quickly established. Where the technically superior Bearcat struggled to accomplish the mission goals, the Hawk passed with flying colors. While the Bearcat was better at ranged engagements and more traditional dogfighting, Anvil's design better matched the original specifications. Their engineers had constructed a spacecraft that was both rugged and workable. Military observers took to referring to the hardy spacecraft as the Iron Hawk. Unfortunately, the Hawk's taste for victory was short. While it earned the production contract, it ultimately saw limited adoption by the military. The first fleets to deploy the U-9A Hawk found it suited to a very specific set of mission types, but not the modern realities of space warfare. The first delivery of production model U-9A-1 Hawks occurred in October 2938. The first unit to transition was the 38th Reconnaissance Wing, based in the Corel system. Although assigned to a forward strike base at Low, the reasoning for the deployment was to allow the Hawk trial-by-fire all-weather training on Castor. These Hawks performed well, though they found themselves with only a limited set of mission options, as the relevant ground and close-range targets quickly learned to just avoid the area of operation. 9 additional military units moved to the Hawk, and another 5 reserve wings continue to operate the spacecraft today. Next, let's look at the more support offerings that serve in purely backline and base operation roles, starting with the Drake Cutlass Red. While Drake famously has no official military contracts, they do sell several civilian ships to the Navy. In 2875, a documentary called Bent Cutlass claimed that Drake had knowingly ignored background check flags when selling ships. The documentary detailed an incident when 12 cutlasses were sold to an intermediary who later transferred them to an outlaw organization for use in a raid that left 122 dead on an orbital outpost. Facing renewed criticism, the company decided to attempt to repeat their past success, introducing what executives termed an, quote, infallible, unquote, Cutlass variant, what would become known as the Cutlass Red. Drake invested a great deal into developing the Red as a bespoke spacecraft. However cynical the inspiration behind the ship's development, the team actually charged with making the project a reality was dedicated to building a spaceborne ambulance that would improve and extend the current standard of care. Red would have its own assembly line, producing a significantly altered fuselage, along with a completely different array of weaponry. The idea of turning a militaristic spacecraft into a hospital support ship greatly appealed to the war-weary Drake development team, and slots on the Cutlass Red program were highly sought after. Early on, designers identified that the Cutlass Red could combine 2 previously unrelated roles: ambulance-style supported patient transport and search and rescue. The latter role, previously the domain of the military-sponsored heavy equipment like the RSI Apollo series, was becoming increasingly necessary as the technology to make survival in a space wreck or other catastrophe was improving greatly across the latter half of the 29th century. With more and more crews able to survive the destruction of their spacecraft and a corresponding increase in space combat occurring on the edges of the Empire, the Cutlass Red was seen as a great opportunity to not only sell well, but also make a positive impact on the systems. Drake assigned a full development team to each role and developed a mediating process for interfacing the two roles into a single ship, using the Cutlass Blue as the basis for the hull of the Red. Each group was ordered and budgeted to develop a single keystone innovation that would help the Red stand apart on a professional level. The ambulance team opted to partner with the up-and-coming medical manufacturer, Bioticorp, to be the first ship to install their new auto-dock medical bed, which would fit into the extended rear cabin. The search and rescue team decided to focus on software, assembling an electronics subdivision to develop the now familiar Nav-E7 long-range scanner system. The Nav-E7 would give the Red a unique edge in identifying and safely maneuvering around patients in three-dimensional space, managing to advance scanner clarity 23% from industry standard using available components alone. Both role-specific projects proceeded extremely well, and because they focused on building out different areas of the ships, needed little mediation when adapted to the final hull design. In all, the conversion of the Cutlass Blue into the Cutlass Red proof of concept took only 11 months, with a fully constructed Red production prototype flying its first round of space trials in September 2876. The ship launched in April of 2877, to little acclaim or sales initially. However, galactic events shifted unexpectedly in Drake's favor when a cruise liner collided with a customs way station in the Corel system, penetrating both ships' hulls and setting off a case of improperly stored explosives aboard the station that caused significant further damage. Dozens were killed immediately and hundreds were left stranded. The ensuing explosion destroyed the station's vacuum hangars, emergency spacecraft, and medical supplies, forcing emergency services on low to put together a makeshift response themselves. The centerpiece of that response became a flight of 36 brand new Cutlass Red spacecraft that had just arrived for sale. Local forces deputized the ships and crewed them with anyone available to help. The familiar Cutlass controls allowed local pilots to make easy use of the Reds during the emergency. The situation was tailor-made for Spectrum stories, with a force of newly painted bright red Cutlasses riding to the rescue and ultimately stabilizing and transporting back and forth dozens of patients who would have otherwise been lost. Following the Corel Customs rescue, sales of the Cutlass Red doubled month over month for 2 years. Drake was forced to move from a single production line to a dedicated factory building only Cutlass Reds. Even more important was the long-term impact of the Cutlass ambulance concept on both aerospace design and emergency services. While the initial metrics for the Red were only based on the need to use similar internal layout to the existing Blue, its rise in importance has led to countless third-party adaptations, including specialized medical components and massive designs. The bed and work area designed into the Cutlass Red has become the industry standard unit that has gone to define everything from loading docks to scanner mounts on a dozen different manufacturers' spacecraft. The ship became so ubiquitous that in the late 29th century, the UEE government purchased 300 Reds as fleet support for the Navy. The Navy has continued to buy small numbers of Cutlasses in the years since, outfitting many planet-side military hospitals with the ships in an attempt to maintain the same standard as civilian agencies. They have as of yet refused to contract a hardened militarized version for the frontline service, favoring the larger and more expensive RSI Apollo instead. Our next ship is another Drake offering, this time the Drake Vulture. The story of the Vulture starts, like most things in Drake, with a modification of the Cutlass. When Drake was making modifications to their Cutlass lineup that would eventually create the variations like the Red, they created a few experimental designs. The most famous one was called the Vertical Landing Test 3, or VLT-3. This was a one-off modification of the original AS-1 Cutlass to test out new technologies to improve the VTOL capabilities of the ship. Unknown to Drake, the ship would end up spawning a new generation of Drake ships, thanks to a mistake by one of their rivals, Misk. On the 9th of August 2895, an incident would take place. The Terra-flagged Hull Sea freighter Empire Slipper suffered what was later determined to be an unlikely cascade of system failures, which resulted in the bridge terminals receiving a completely incorrect set of navigation overlays. The error caused the Slipper's navigation officer to chart a course into a dense asteroid belt within close proximity to the danger zone of a red giant's corona. A debris strike subsequently disabled the aging freighter's shields and, unfortunately, delivered a dose of fatal radiation to the crew. The ship was left adrift and its specific location unknown. As the freighter was known to be carrying a wealth of precious metals and a consignment of rare artwork, intense media interest and a massive search and rescue operation followed. After 8 months of searches, a UEE Navy picket ship identified the wreckage of the Slipper adrift in the irradiated debris belt. However, it quickly became clear that the region was practically inaccessible to any dedicated salvage ship with enough protection to survive the operation. Being the builder of the Hull Sea, MISC offered a 10 million credit bounty to anyone capable of recovering the black box data recorder in an effort to explain what had happened. Unexpectedly, upstart spacecraft manufacturer Drake Interplanetary came to the rescue, seeking both the bounty and the salvage rights to the skipper's cargo. An elite team convened on Berea to create a makeshift spacecraft capable of solving this very particular problem. This is where the VLT-3 would come into the picture. With all testing equipment removed, the VLT-3 quickly became a specialized platform intended to reach the Empire Slipper and recover its cargo. Heavy shield generators replaced much of the prototype ship's standard cargo capacity, and a pair of versatile remote manipulator arms were bolted to the prow. The result was something unlike any other spacecraft currently flying: an overshielded, underpowered amalgamation that was small enough to navigate the debris field while keeping its crew of 2 safe. What's more, the VLT-3 could engage in any necessary salvage operations using its external arms without requiring EVA, which was made impossible by the amount of radiation involved. 14 months after the Empire Slipper disappeared, Drake's test crew began salvage operations from a hastily established modular space station positioned just outside the danger zone. Over the course of 36 perilous expeditions, the VLT-3 repeatedly entered the debris field and carefully removed the Slipper's flight recorders, and then, one by one, the valuable cargo containers. Drake claimed and received salvage rights for the valuable cargo and promptly delivered the recovered flight recorders to MISC. While there was some drama after the end with a legal fight over the black box data recovered by Drake, the VLT-3 was quickly forgotten about in the grand scheme of the news cycle, and Drake quietly warehoused the unique ship and nearly forgot about it until an incident 40 years later would shove it back into the limelight. In 2932, an Aegis Dynamics reclaimer, the General Dogsbody, made history with the single most profitable salvage mission in human history when it discovered and recovered a failed 22nd century colony ship adrift in deep space. The ship's crew became millionaires and minor celebrities overnight, and the event prompted a much greater interest in the previously uncelebrated task of space salvage. As interest in salvage boomed and crews began pooling money to purchase their own reclaimer platforms, Drake executives realized they already had a more appealing option in their back pocket. A team of aerospace engineers led by Drake's in-house designer, Sod Perkins, began work on developing the VLT-3 concept into a standalone salvage spacecraft. While the new design would be built from the ground up and wouldn't need heavy shielding of the original, the overall layout and functionality would remain surprisingly similar to the prototype. The early manipulator arms were replaced with what Drake would ultimately call rippers, standalone salvage booms supported by a lariat tractor beam and a tomnium scraper rig. These booms would allow the craft to identify, move, and cut space salvage and then store it in the ship's rear bay. Like the VLT-3, the ship was oriented around shipboard controls rather than EVA support. The crew capacity is reduced from 2 to 1, reinforcing the idea that a single pilot could operate this ship and potentially make their fortune the same way the Dogsbody crew had. A small rear living section would allow for a solo operator to endure long voyages, as salvage sites were rarely close to well-traveled space lanes. Finally, the Vulture would feature maneuvering thrusters and an oversized shield generator to enable it to make careful movements not possible with larger ships like the Reclaimer. Drake premiered the ship, called the Vulture, in 2938, with a marketing that called back to the success of the VLT-3, including stylizing the spacecraft name as the Vulture, with the VLT capitalized and the E replaced with a 3. Public interest in salvage and personal fortune-seeking continued, and orders quickly outpaced production capacity at Berea. Within 8 months, Drake was forced to open 2 remote facilities to meet demand. Vultures immediately found success with the discovery and parting of several high-value holes. These include a Genesis Starliner long thought to be destroyed, and 2 Hull A's that had collided and spun away from their planned routes in an unexpected manner. In 2943, the United Empire of Earth Navy requisitioned 300 Vultures for battlefield support operations. The military versions weren't hardened and didn't feature additional weapons, as they were never intended to be used in combat. Delivery of these ships began the following year, where they immediately saw service with the Fleet Support Arm, clearing destroyed spacecraft in the wake of the ever-increasing battles with the Vandul. Drake has continued to develop the government version of the Vulture, as the expectation is large-scale naval battles will only increase in frequency and furor in the years to come. Last on our list is arguably the backbone of the UEE Navy, the Argo MPUV. By the late 26th century, the company had dominated the maglev industry almost entirely, making both the tracks and the trains that ran on them for most of the UEE. Seeking to further improve their services and networks, Argo had a dedicated team of designers seeking problem spots that could be candidates for improvement. While analyzing delays with their cargo trains, they discovered that the biggest impacts to schedule was often not their rail systems, but with holdups incurred during the transfer processes at various ports. Moving goods on and off trains could take significant time and often be subject to a wide variety of traffic problems. In order to streamline the process, Argo sought a way to control the transfers themselves. The solution was found in the purchase of Teluman Shipworks, a struggling company that manufactured recreational shuttlecraft. Retrofitting Telemon's facilities on Castle, Argo's engineering team created an orbital utility craft, or OUC, that could move cargo storage containers directly from long haulers onto their train cars, incorporating their lock and latch system to the craft's frame. It streamlined the loading process significantly. It wasn't long before the OUC found a wider audience than just Argo's own transit systems, though. As more and more pilots experienced the rugged ease with which the OUC operated, they soon started purchasing the craft secondhand and outfitting them for their own purposes. Argo, seeing that the demand was there, decided to make a ship centered around these new customers, and in 2619 released the Argo Multi-Purpose Utility Vehicle, their first publicly available spaceship. Coming in at a length of 9.5 meters, a width of 8.5 meters, and a height of 4.3 meters, the MPUV was tiny by most standards. This ship lacked a quantum drive, but made up for it with its versatility and ease of use. Just about everyone, from a veteran down to a total amateur, could easily fly one, and their rugged construction made them incredibly forgivable. The secret to its success, however, was the latch-and-go technology pioneered by Argo, as a means to speed up transportation of freight aboard trains. This allowed the ship to connect with anything that had the technology, and because of the popularity of the OUC, adapting the latch-and-go technique to many different unique bespoke assets, that was already a long list. At the time of the craft's initial launch, only a cargo module was available, adapted to work with the latch-and-go tech. However, before long, people carriers, recovery pods, repair modules, and more varieties were sold. If there was work to do, there was an Argo MPUV module to do it. Before long, the MPUV entirely overshadowed the OUC in popularity, and even the military has come to depend on the MPUV for their utility needs, with at least one of the ships being housed in every capital ship of the fleet, often in their own unique bays. Those were the ships of the UEE Navy. While not every ship can be the hero of the fleet, all are important to keep the Navy of humanity at peak fighting shape. From capitals to support ships and everything in between, these are the ships that have kept the peace and won the wars. However, it's important to note that that quote I gave at the beginning wasn't the whole quote. What Admiral Burke went on to say is as important in the 30th century as it was in the 20th. The men and women who command these ships are as important as the ships themselves. He said, "Naval officers must therefore understand not only how to fight a war, but how to use the tremendous power which they operate to sustain a world of liberty and justice without unleashing the powerful instruments of destruction and chaos that they have at their command." I'd like to thank you for watching. And if you enjoyed the video, think about liking the video, subscribing for more content, and hitting the bell icon to be notified when these release. These take a long time to research and edit, so hitting that like button goes a long way to promoting it to other like-minded lovers of Star Citizen and lore in general. This was a fun series to do, and I hope y'all like the compilation after the fact. I know a lot of y'all like longer videos, and I hope this helps with those of you who I know fall asleep to my videos. If you do, type Shelley Sleep Squad in the comments. Hopefully, we'll get the launch of Squadron by the end of next year, though at this point it's anyone's guess as to when it will drop. At the very least, we can hope is that it's playable and fun. So if you're watching this after the release of Squadron, drop a line in the comments and tell me how good or bad it was. I'd also like to thank those on screen for supporting the channel financially. If you want to throw in a few credits, think about becoming a member on YouTube. If you want a bit more for your contribution, join the Patreon. Patreons get early, ad-free access to all videos, including exclusive early access to my long-running Complete History of Star Citizen lore series. Check those out now in the top right if you want to know what you're getting. Thanks again for watching, and always remember, ex Historia ad Astra.